Hello everyone, this is Drawing and Talking, where I draw stuff while talking about it. You might be able to surmise from the fact that the canvas is not completely blank that there had been recording mishaps, but that is not something that you need to know about. Anyways, the subject that I am working on today is going to be the battle between a humanoid thing and a gigantic centipede. I talked a bunch about how centipede is the ultimate life form in the arthropod world, but I guess that recording is lost to the ether. The salient points that I would bring up from that conversation is that lots of people actually keep strange organisms as pets, such as scorpions or tarantula. However, centipedes is reputed to be the most dangerous among them all because of their aggressive nature, where other organisms, such as the other arthropods mentioned, would often back down in the face of danger. Centipedes tends to attack head-on. Also, in the sadistic videos produced by people who arrange arthropods to fight in artificial gladiator pits, aka a bowl with two bugs in it, usually turn out in the centipede's favor just because of their aggressive nature, which make it so that the centipedes are always the ones on the offensive and the other organisms are always the ones trying to get away or trying to defend themselves. But obviously that's not going to be possible when some higher life form has put them in a plastic bowl and encouraging them to fight to the death. Alright. I am relatively happy with the way things are turning out for me on the canvas so far. The cheesy life advice that you can extrapolate from the centipede versus other organism battle is that you cannot run away from your problem, especially if you have the suspicion that some higher being has forced you to confront that problem. Otherwise, you may just find that problem jab you in the ribs with its poisonous fangs. That is what editors call mixed metaphor. I'm probably terribly incoherent, but that is just par for the course, whatever that idiom means. Also, if you're looking at the screen, you might notice that I am drawing giant butterfly wings on this humanoid thing, and you might ask me what am I doing for a person who watch videos of arthropods tearing into each other. The answer is two parts, let's say. The first part is that butterfly wings and moth wings in general holds a different significance for me personally than it might hold for most other people. Namely, I find these kind of funny enough, these kinds of arthropods, because insects are a kind of arthropods and butterflies and moths are insects. By the way, that also makes me think of the argument that certain fruits are not fruits, they are berries, but that is plainly ridiculous. That's trying to say your cat is not an animal because it's a feline or something. Anyways, that digression has run long enough. Basically, I find the Lepidopterans to be personally significant because they represent changes. Lepidopteran, of course, just means moths and butterflies. It's a fancy Latin word that means wings with scales, as is the case with those creatures whose wings are covered in scales if you look at them under microscopes. Basically, I'm fascinated with the process of metamorphosis that these organisms undergo. But of course, other creatures such as flies also undergo metamorphosis. So in that regard, there is nothing unique about moths and butterflies. But they are a lot prettier as well. So that is why they are usually the best representatives for the process of metamorphosis. I'm going to erase everything that I have been working on this part, because I realize that it would probably work a lot better if I tried to figure out the general outline of things in terms of the spaces they're going to take up before I try to outline the details. Finally, something that you could take away as art-related advice. But then again, if you wanted those, you wouldn't be here watching an amateur. Looks like I'm going to need a bigger canvas. So, like I said, butterflies and moths are interesting to me because they represent metamorphosis. And it's actually a process that is more impressive the more you know about it. Because in the process of a caterpillar's metamorphosis into moth and other things of that sort, what happens is that the cells in the larvae's body are completely destroyed. Almost every single one, except for a few. And what happens then is that the cells that are destroyed are recycled as the fuel or the nutrient for those remaining cells, which is actually dormant and pretty much useless when the larvae is developing. But during the metamorphosis phase, the dormant cells starts to grow into things that the larvae did not have. For example, they can grow into wings or eyes and adult brain. That to me is a very interesting concept, because I wonder what would be the human equivalent of that. That someone would have to destroy their old self as a person to become someone new and better. Or presumably better, because who knows, maybe caterpillars find the adult lepidopterans to be terrible. This looks better to me. So, to reinforce the lesson that may or may not work, if you want things to look good, make sure that they look good before the details are in there. Okay, so I think the sketching parts of the drawing is looking pretty okay. Now all I need to do is to put them in one layer and start working on the actual line work. By the way, if I sound a little strange, but I guess I always sound strange. But if I sound especially strange right now, it's because I had no idea that I would be recording a video today. Because the machine I'm using to record the video is extremely fickle. But you don't need to be hearing about that. Alright. I'm actually going to work on some background first, and which serves as a pretty good reminder to myself to talk about the reason why I have chosen the specific subject that I am using right now. So if you have never looked up at the screen, which is just fine, because the original reason why I decided to make this kind of video is because when I am drawing myself, I often feel like it would be nice if some other artist is also drawing something and talking about it. Anyways, the original reason why I have chosen the particular subject, which is this conflict between the gigantic centipede I am drawing and the weird flying humanoid creature with butterfly wings, is because it's twofold. The first one is because I wanted there to be some conflict in my drawing. People often say that every story needs a conflict. That is often the case with writing, which unfortunately is another hobby that I decided to pick up at some point to weigh down my free time. Anyways, I am working under the hypothesis that not only does that principle applies to writing, but it also applies to drawing, or whatever you call this. So I wanted there to be some sort of confrontation between two opposing sides. And the reason why I chose a centipede in particular is one, because I feel like centipedes are such threatening, such menacing creatures. Also, I have spent considerable time studying reference images of centipedes. The other reason why is because I have revisited some of my old favorites in literature, namely the Lovecraft stuff. And I realized something that Lovecraft was doing, which is that his writings are actually featuring the same connected universe. Now that concept in itself is nothing surprising, but it's surprising to me personally that there seems to be so few other artists that do the same kind of thing, that write in the same connected universe, or at least doing so in a way that is apparent as is the case with the Lovecraftian horror. So for example, there isn't really that many good examples now that I come to think of it. Usually the connection between the Lovecraftian stories are the shared names of the alien gods. So the same name of a god could be mentioned multiple times throughout different stories, and they hold roughly the same significance. I find that to be a nuanced is perhaps not the right word, maybe inspired way of showing off one's fictional universe, one's world building, without being too over the head about it, as might be the case in something like Lord of the Rings. I never read the Lord of the Rings books because they are way too long and my attention span is comparatively way too short. But I have heard people say that Lord of the Rings is a nightmare of exposition about the world and things like that. So I feel like it's a more effective way of doing things to show off one's world building by using multiple by featuring the same world in multiple works of art. In the case of Lovecraft, in multiple fiction stories. So that is also something that I am trying to do, beginning with this particular piece. Of course, the undertone, if you haven't picked up on it, is that the subjects that I'm drawing is taking place in a fictional universe that I made up. Now, I'm going to take my own advice and not hit you over the head with exposition about what that world is. Suffice to say, it is a world in which there are gigantic centipedes and people with butterfly wings for some reason. Speaking of this being a aggressive confrontation, I may have to change the pose of that butterfly person in a moment. But right now I'm just having a ton of fun drawing tree roots. Speaking of horror, the other thing that I talked about in the botched recording session is that the other piece of horror that seems to be popular lately is Stephen King's It, following the movie adaptation that is a remake of an existing adaptation. So I was intrigued and I read the book in audiobook form because I can never force myself to look at text. This is not, however, a sponsored video for some sort of audiobook website because I'm not popular enough for that yet. Anyways, I read the book and to my surprise it's not actually that focused on horror. It may be easy for people to think that it is a primarily horror-focused book, but as it turns out, I feel personally that it's more about childhood nostalgia rather than anything else. Of course, there is the infamous scene where a bunch of children in that book were having relationships that they probably shouldn't have at that age. That, in light of the actual focus of the story, seems to me to be the author's kind of personal catharsis in relieving certain lingering regret from childhood. I feel like a lot of characters in that book are self-inserts from Stephen King, but knowing nothing about that person, I cannot be sure. The roots in the background are not the greatest, but I think they will have to do. I was about to do some erasing on the background, but then I realized that since this is only the sketch part of the drawing, I don't even need to do that because I can just do it after the line work is complete. Now I have been feeling a little conflicted because in trying to refine my techniques lately and in trying to make colored images, because I realized that black and white is not actually so easy to do, I have come up with the practice of putting in background colors first. However, I'm not sure if that's going to work so well in this case. I think this is a pretty good color for the sort of mossy gray stone feel for the background. The visual storytelling, if I'm successful, should show that the gigantic blocks are some sort of ancient ruin, and the tree roots theoretically should also help with that. But then again, I can never be so sure with my own visual storytelling, because looking back at my older art, I realize that some things are not so clear. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about is that in my recent attempts at being a half-decent artist, I have noticed an interesting phenomenon when I am working on my drawings. That is, sometimes when I want to draw a specific image, I can often have a sort of mental impression of the final product that I want to be making. I suppose that in itself is nothing surprising. What is somewhat revelatory to me, at least, is that I realize that whenever I am trying to draw an image, and then in the process of doing so, I think about, hey, it would be really good if I tried this technique. What often end up happening is that if I am trying to forcibly engender some sort of technique or effect, it ruins the original visualization of the drawing that I want to be making, and it make it so that I actually lose my grasp of the visualization, and the products are often unsatisfying, at least to me. I'm not sure if I have made myself very clear. Basically, I guess if you have to turn this into an advice, it would be, if you have a specific image you want to draw, carefully think about that visualization and try not to deviate from that mental conception just because you think using a certain technique is going to be better for you. I suppose this is also something that varies very much from person to person. The other somewhat interesting and quite frustrating phenomenon that I have noticed is that the saturation on my computer screen is a lot lower than the saturation in my drawing device. Alright, so this looks like something that I can work on. I have to say that I am impressed by other people who can go on talking for hours, as is the case for certain Twitch streamers, because I realize that is something that I clearly cannot do. With that said, I think this would wrap it up for this video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.